When a retired trucker gave a hot meal to a struggling veteran's family, he had no idea a stranger was filming. The next day, military trucks lined up outside his empty diner. Was it payback or something much bigger? The wind had started to pick up just after sunset, sweeping dust across the empty highway like whispers from a forgotten world. Neon letters flickered on the rusty sign that read "Eric's Diner Open Late," casting a pale blue glow onto the worn pavement. Inside, the place was quiet. The old radio had been off for over an hour, and the only sound was the hiss of coffee warming on the burner and the occasional creak of a stool shifting as Eric moved behind the counter. Eric Dawson, now in his late 60s, had once driven 18-wheelers coast to coast, logging thousands of miles and more sunrises than he could count. His hands, thick and scarred, told the story of decades spent turning wrenches, securing loads, and gripping a steering wheel through rain, snow, and sleepless nights. He had opened the diner just 3 months earlier, using what was left of his savings and pension. It was a quiet dream he'd nurtured for years, a place to serve hot meals and warm words to those who lived on the road like he once did. But business had been slow, too slow. He didn't complain. Instead, he brewed coffee like it mattered, flipped burgers with precision, and treated every passing driver like family. Most nights, though, he watched more headlights pass by than pull in. That evening, as he wiped down the counter for the third time, the soft chime of the diner's bell finally rang. A battered minivan crept into the lot, headlights dim, engine wheezing. Inside, a man stepped out, tall and lean with a rigid posture that didn't match the weariness in his eyes. A woman followed, carrying a small child. Another kid, maybe 10 or 11, hopped out of the back and clung to his mother's coat. They entered quietly. Eric glanced up and offered a tired smile. "Sit anywhere you'd like," he said. "You're just in time. Got fresh stew on the stove." The family hesitated. The man, Sam, lowered his voice as they reached the counter. His clothes were clean but threadbare, and his boots were military issue, scuffed from time and travel. We don't have any money," he admitted. "I just got off the base in Texas. We're heading north, looking for work. Things got tight. We've been living out of the van." Eric didn't miss a beat. "Then sit down," he said, motioning to the booth by the window. "You can't drive on an empty stomach. Let me take care of it." Sam hesitated. Julia's eyes welled with gratitude, and the older child looked up in disbelief as they slid into the booth. Eric brought them hot stew, cornbread, scrambled eggs, even extra milk for the kids. No one else came in that night. As the family ate slowly, savoring every bite, Eric slipped out the back with an old grocery bag. He filled it with dry goods from the pantry, canned beans, cereal, a loaf of bread, and quietly tucked it into the van. Then he grabbed the red gas can he kept behind the diner and topped off their tank under the dim light of the parking lot lamp. Unseen, someone watched from a nearby gas station, just a kid with a phone, scrolling through apps until something interesting happened. He filmed a blurry clip of Eric walking back from the van, dragging the gas can, and typed up a caption that dripped with cynicism. "This guy's been feeding freeloaders all week, keeps giving handouts to bums. Guess this is how you get famous these days." He uploaded it before finishing his soda. Inside, Eric poured hot cocoa for the kids and smiled as they devoured the last of the cornbread. Sam tried to argue to repay somehow, but Eric just shook his head. "You served," he said quietly. "Now let someone else serve you." When the family left that night, the kids waved through the van's back window. Julia mouthed a silent thank you, her eyes shining. Sam paused to shake Eric's hand. A strong grip, wordless, but full of meaning. Then they were gone, taillights vanishing into the night. The next morning, Eric opened the diner at dawn like always. He didn't check social media. He didn't notice the odd looks from the gas station clerk next door or the way a passing couple slowed their walk as they neared his door, then kept going. He poured coffee, waited. The bell over the door never rang. Later that afternoon, a young man walked in, ordered a coffee, and stared at his phone the entire time. Before leaving, he asked, "So, is it true? You just give out food to anyone who walks in?" Eric looked at him for a moment and replied, "I give food to people who are hungry." The man left without another word. It wasn't until a local reporter called and asked if he wanted to comment on the backlash that Eric realized something had changed. The video had gone viral, but not the way anyone might expect from a story of kindness. The internet had turned it into a spectacle, one more target for judgment and ridicule. Some praised Eric, but many others, louder voices, mocked him, called him a naive old man, claimed he was attracting vagrants and ruining the area. People who had never once set foot in his diner suddenly had very strong opinions about it. Eric didn't respond. He didn't make a video or write a post or plead his case. He just turned the sign in the window to open, brewed another pot of coffee, and waited for someone to sit at table 7 again. But that night, the tables stayed empty, and outside, the world kept scrolling. The internet has a strange way of turning whispers into wildfires. By the third day after the video went viral, Eric's diner no longer felt like the warm, quiet refuge it once was. What had started as a grainy clip of an old man helping a hungry family had spiraled into something darker. Out-of-context headlines made the rounds. Local diner owner feeding freeloaders to go viral? Sympathy for sale? People who had never stepped inside spoke with certainty online. They painted Eric as a manipulator, someone exploiting veterans and the homeless for attention. They speculated, judged, and piled on. The damage was swift and ruthless. Where once truckers and townsfolk shared booths and stories over hot stew, now the tables sat empty. Eric opened the diner each morning like always, wiped the counters down, prepped the grill, and waited. The bell above the door rarely rang. The hum of traffic outside never paused. His parking lot, a patch of cracked concrete flanked by a flickering sign, looked more like a ghost town than a gathering spot. One by one, regular customers stopped showing up. Even the retirees who used to nurse black coffee for hours and gossip about road conditions fell silent. A few of them left voicemails Eric never returned. Others drove by slowly but never pulled in. Then came the calls from suppliers. "We're reevaluating our delivery routes," one said. "Brand alignment is critical these days," another added vaguely. Some just stopped answering altogether. And through it all, Eric said nothing. He didn't go online to defend himself. He didn't make a post explaining the truth or challenging the rumors. He didn't call a reporter or make a video. When a friend urged him to speak up, he simply muttered, "The truth doesn't need shouting," and kept brewing coffee for no one. But not everyone was willing to let the silence win. Miles away, in a borrowed guest room at her sister's house, Julia sat on the edge of a mattress, her heart heavy. She watched her children sleep, their stomachs finally full thanks to Eric's kindness. Sam had left that morning to follow a job lead in another town. But Julia couldn't rest. That night in the diner had stayed with her like a song she couldn't stop humming, kindness echoing through the noise. When she saw the video online, warped and flooded with hate, it made her sick. People were tearing down the very man who'd fed her kids and filled their gas tank without asking a thing in return. She knew she couldn't fix the internet, but maybe she could fix something. That afternoon, she bundled up a few jars of her homemade strawberry jam, something she used to sell at weekend fairs, and drove back toward the diner. The sky hung low and gray, and the road stretched endlessly in both directions. When she pulled into the lot, only one car was there, Eric's. Inside, the diner felt hollow. A thin layer of dust had begun to settle on the corner tables. A stack of unused menus sat untouched beside the register, and a half-wilted bouquet of artificial flowers leaned awkwardly in the front window. Julia stepped in, clutching the bag in her hands. "Eric?" she called gently. No answer. She heard a soft clatter from the kitchen, pots being rearranged. Maybe. She walked to the counter and waited, breathing in the faint scent of coffee. Then something caught her eye. Behind the register, partially obscured by an overhanging shelf, was a small wooden frame coated in dust. Inside it, slightly askew, was a military commendation medal, worn, unpolished, and next to it, a black and white photograph. 5 men stood together, dressed in desert fatigues. Most of their faces were hard to see through the glass glare, but one stood out. Center left, younger but unmistakable. Eric. He looked leaner, hair still dark, face set with a quiet intensity. The others, soldiers, younger and bruised, stood around him like they were barely holding it together. Julia blinked, then stepped closer. Carefully, she lifted her phone and took a photo of the frame. Later that evening, back home, she sent the photo to someone she hadn't spoken to in years, Sergeant Mike Rivera, one of Sam's former squad leaders from his first tour. She added a simple message. "Hey Mike, I was at a diner run by this guy. Do you recognize him?" The reply didn't come for hours. When it did, it wasn't a text. It was a phone call. Julia picked up on the first ring. "Where did you say this picture was taken?" Mike asked, his voice tight. "A diner, south of State Route 82. "It's his place," Julia said, sitting up straighter. "Why?" Mike exhaled slowly, like he was trying to steady himself. "That man. That's Eric Dawson. You're telling me he's alive?" Julia was stunned. "Yes, he owns the diner." "Why? What happened?" Mike's voice dropped. "He's a legend. Eric was a field medic in Iraq. There was a mission in '04 ambush near Fallujah. Half the squad was pinned down, wounded. Everyone thought it was over. Eric ran straight into gunfire, no cover, no backup. Dragged 3 of our guys out one by one. One of them was Colonel Barrett. He never talked about it. Said the guy disappeared after discharge." Julia's hand went to her mouth. Mike continued, "We always wondered what happened to him. Nobody ever got to say thank you." Julia sat in silence, staring at the photo on her screen again. Dusty, forgotten, hidden behind a register in a half-empty diner. This wasn't just a man who served hot meals to strangers. This was a man who once ran toward gunfire to save lives. A man who had never asked for recognition. A man who had quietly helped others, whether in a desert battlefield or a roadside booth, because it was simply who he was. And now the world was tearing him apart for being too kind. Julia knew with every part of her being that this story, his story, had to be told. And she knew exactly who to tell it to first. The sun hadn't yet risen when the first sound broke the silence. The low, rumbling growl of diesel engines cutting through the morning fog. At first, it was just one vehicle, then 2, then a dozen. By 6 a.m., the cracked parking lot of Eric's diner, once an empty stretch of gravel and oil stains, was full to the edges. Military jeeps, Harley-Davidsons with faded flags, polished pickup trucks bearing veteran plates, and even a few camo-painted Humvees now lined the lot in tight formation. Dust rose around them as boots hit the ground. One by one, they stepped out. Some wore uniforms crisp and clean. Others wore nothing more than old service jackets and weathered caps with faded patches. A few leaned on canes or helped one another stand. But every man and woman who gathered there stood with purpose. At the front of the group, a tall figure emerged from a black pickup. His movements were slow but precise, his silver hair cropped short beneath a perfectly kept military cap. A line of medals shimmered across his chest like a timeline of service. His name was Colonel James Davis, retired, respected, and, until today, silent. The front door of the diner creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, Eric was bent over a pot of coffee, moving slow like always, tired in his bones but unwilling to change routine. When the bell chimed, he didn't look up. "We're not open yet," he called out softly, wiping his hands on a towel. "I'm not here for breakfast," the voice answered, deep and resonant. Eric turned and froze. It had been decades since he'd seen that face, older now, but still etched with discipline. Eric's brow furrowed, searching for the name. "Colonel Davis?" he whispered. The officer stepped forward, extended a hand, and then pulled Eric into a firm embrace. The room fell still. No clatter of plates, no background hum. Just 2 men, surrounded by silence and memory. When they pulled apart, the colonel turned to face the growing crowd now filtering into the diner. "I owe this man my life," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "In 2004, outside Fallujah, I was bleeding out behind a burning truck. The enemy was closing in. My radio was dead. I couldn't move." He paused, his voice wavering for the first time. "Then this man, Eric Dawson, ran straight into gunfire. Not once, but 3 times. He pulled out every wounded man he could find. He patched me up with his bare hands, carried me across open ground, and disappeared before I could thank him. For 20 years, I've told that story without a name." He turned to Eric again. "Until now." A murmur rippled through the room. Sniffles, quiet exclamations, stunned silence. More veterans stepped forward. A younger Marine pointed to a burn scar on his wrist. "You dragged me out too. I never knew who you were." Another man, older, with tears in his eyes, clutched a photo of a younger brother who hadn't made it home. "You gave us closure." Eric stood still, his mouth slightly open, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of memories, faces, voices. These were men he had patched together in desert heat with shaking hands and torn fabric. Ghosts he thought he'd never see again. He cleared his throat, but his voice cracked. "I didn't do anything special," he managed. "I was just doing my job." Colonel Davis stepped beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't have to. That's what made it special." Word traveled fast. Within hours, reporters began showing up, at first local, then regional. Cameras rolled as more trucks pulled into the lot. Some came from neighboring counties, others from out of state. Convoys of truckers who had heard the story through CB radios and veteran forums parked along the shoulder of the highway and walked in. The diner, once silent and shunned, was now electric with conversation, laughter, and reverence. A group of bikers helped fix the neon sign that had been flickering for weeks. A local mechanic offered free work on Eric's old pickup. Kids from the high school down the road swept the lot clean. Donations began to pour in, not just money, but supplies, notes, letters from families of soldiers who had once been under Eric's care. One envelope came with no return address, only a single sentence scribbled inside: "You saved my son. I never got to say thank you." At the center of it all, Eric stood quietly, still wearing his grease-stained apron, pouring coffee for old friends and total strangers alike. When asked by a reporter how it felt to finally be recognized, he simply replied, "I didn't open this place for recognition. I opened it to keep doing what I know how to do, feed people who need it." And that, it turned out, was exactly why they had come. That evening, the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the crowded lot. American flags fluttered from antennae and tailgates. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with diesel and barbecue smoke from a veteran who'd set up a grill in the back. Inside the diner, Julia watched from a table, her children sitting beside her, eyes wide with wonder. She saw Eric pause for a moment, resting against the counter, eyes glassy but grateful. He looked over to her, and they shared a small, knowing nod, because something had shifted. He was no longer just the man in the video, the quiet cook in a forgotten roadside diner. He was something else now, something the world had almost forgotten how to see. He was a hero, and now, finally, everyone knew. Weeks passed, but the diner never returned to its old, quiet rhythm, and that was a good thing. What once was a forgotten outpost on a dusty roadside had become something more. Trucks lined the gravel shoulder, flags waved from mirrors, and the smell of sizzling bacon mixed with fresh coffee and motor oil. The laughter of children echoed from the booths. Strangers became regulars. Regulars became friends. Eric's diner wasn't just serving food anymore. It was serving belonging. The parking lot, once cracked and empty, now bore the signs of care. New paint, planted flowers, and a wooden bench carved by a local vet named Harris, who had lost a leg overseas but found peace in woodworking. He called it the waiting spot. A group of local truckers, many of them veterans themselves, formed a volunteer crew. They called themselves the Route Watch. On days when supply trucks hesitated to deliver due to bad press or corporate fear, the Route Watch showed up instead, hauling crates of eggs, sacks of flour, and even a donated espresso machine that one driver had stashed in his garage. "For the mornings," he said, grinning. Inside the diner, hand-painted signs now hung on the walls. "Pay it forward here, veterans eat free, and one warm meal can save a life." No marketing, no hashtags, just values quietly lived. One wall near the window had been transformed completely. With help from Julia and several of the returning veterans, they had built the memory wall, a collection of photos, patches, medals, and stories written on scraps of paper and napkins. There were pictures of young soldiers, letters from mothers, Polaroids of truckers and their dogs, drawings from children whose parents never made it back. In the center hung a framed copy of that dusty medal Julia had found behind the counter, now polished and proud. And above it, in bold letters carved from oak, Service is never wasted. One morning, as the breakfast rush died down and sunlight poured in through the front windows, the bell over the door chimed. A man stood there, mid-40s, nervous, clutching a manila envelope. Eric looked up from behind the counter. There was something familiar in the man's eyes. I'm the guy," he said quietly. "The one who posted the video." The room fell still. Forks paused midair. Coffee stopped pouring. The man swallowed hard, stepping forward. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't even stop to ask. I just saw a moment and made a judgment, and a lot of people got hurt because of it." He placed the envelope on the counter and slid it forward with shaking hands. "There's a letter inside. You don't have to read it. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry." Eric looked at him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Not of full forgiveness, but of understanding. The man left without asking for anything, the door swinging shut behind him. Later that day, when the crowd had thinned, Eric opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a single sentence. "The world needs more people like you. I promise to be one of them." 2 days later, Colonel Davis returned. This time, he didn't come alone. Flanked by an honor guard in full dress uniform, the colonel walked through the diner as everyone stood. Children stopped coloring. Veterans stood at attention. Phones stayed in pockets. No one wanted to break the moment. At the front, Davis unfolded a perfectly pressed American flag and handed it to Eric with both hands. "This flag flew over the base where you once served. It now belongs here." He then presented a bronze plaque, etched with fine lettering, in honor of Eric Dawson for service beyond duty, on the battlefield and at the table. He never stopped giving. Eric, overwhelmed, removed his cap. He looked out at the crowd, not seeking applause, not offering a speech, but letting his eyes say what his mouth couldn't. "Thank you, all of you." That evening, the camera of a local news crew captured the final shots. Children laughing in booths. A trucker holding his baby girl, feeding her bites of pancake. Julia and Sam sitting by the window, their kids sharing a milkshake. Veterans raising coffee mugs in salute. The memory wall glowing under soft, amber light. And at the center of it all, behind the counter, apron on, sleeves rolled up, stood Eric. Pouring coffee, flipping pancakes, listening, always listening. The man who once drove alone now fed an army of hearts. And he never once asked for thanks. This story reminds us that quiet heroes walk among us, still serving, still giving, even when no one's watching. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments, and type respect to honor veterans like Eric. And if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that honor the unseen heroes around us. See you in the next video.